SantaCruzSentinel.com.
Hello and welcome to the Reporter's Notebook, the occasional podcast presented by the Santa Cruz Sentinel. I'm your host, Anthony L. Solis, and we just had an election, the primary election on June 5th. And election night's a pretty big night here at the newspaper, and I wanted to bring back our favorite and most frequent guest, Kara Meyberg Guzman, to talk about her first election night as the managing editor of the Sentinel. So, Kara, thanks for joining me again.
We made it.
We survived. You never can tell, when it comes to election night. But how did it go for you?
I thought it was fun. It was definitely a busy night. Kind of eye-opening how busy what I see as the real election night, November, is going to be.
Right. So this was kind of, this was the primary, but for us, it was kind of a live dry run.
Right.
It was a test
it's
case
like
in a way.
election light because there's probably half as many races and ballot measures and things to watch in the June primary as we'll have in November.
Yeah. So now not everything gets counted by the time we go to press. So were you able to get anything or as much as you wanted into the paper that next day, or how did you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things we were worried about is what are we going to have in the Wednesday paper after Election Day? How accurate will the results be that we're going to put out there in print? We were able to get the early results in, the very first preliminary results, which was basically just the absentee ballots. And I don't even know if I don't think we got anything beyond the absentee ballots in. The first batch of results didn't get posted until 10:30 that night, which is after our press time.
Right. And I think the last page of the design center, the design center for the newspaper has to print at 10:30. So we have to be done by 10-ish somewhere.
Yeah, right about. We held it as late as possible till like 10. I think we went right up till 10:30 that night,
and then they posted right after you hit
exactly.
send. Yeah, of course. I think they
but
knew.
we were all spent. It was like,
yeah. And this was a light election. Can you imagine come November?
Oh man, yeah.
You're preparing now. You carbo loading for that right now.
I'm on. We are. It was a long build up to this June election. We convened our editorial board, which took several months.
Of which I was on for the first time.
Right.
So I got to participate in that, which is very interesting. I feel like I knew more about elections this year than I ever really had because I actually got to talk to and ask questions to the candidates. It was interesting.
Got to look at all the candidates that we interviewed in the eye and, report back what we saw.
Right. And then talk to, Dan Walters and Joe Nation over we called them in and did kind of an audio recording of all that, which everybody still can listen to if they want. I know the election's over, but those audio recordings are available up on SantaCruzSentinel.com. They're kind of fascinating, especially the Dan Walters and Joe Nation one. Those two were really interesting to kind of get their take on. We talked to them kind of about the Measure S, and what the pensions, how that affected the city.
Right. Yeah. Measure S was billed as something, a small sales tax increase that would hold off any cuts to programs like in the Parks and Rec department, and fire, et cetera. But really, what our editorial board found was it's about pensions and being able to pay down the pension obligations for the next several years. So, yeah, getting to talk to experts, both on city staff and independent, was, I thought, really eye-opening.
And we did pass Measure S. We're sitting in the studio right now, so this is kind of putting you on the spot. Do you happen to know what some of the final or finalist tallies are for Measure S anyway? How much that passed by?
Well, nothing's official yet. They're still counting thousands of ballots, and it's going to take a few more weeks. So I think right now it was something like 75% yes, 25% no on Measure S, and it just needed a majority to pass. So pretty safe to say, I think, that it's going to pass.
Yeah, it seems that way. Now, we also have a pretty close race that's still, it's actually going to move to November. At least it seems like it is at this point now. Which race is that?
Well, we have a few close races that I think are still too close to call. The hottest race is the 4th District Supervisor race. Greg Caput, the incumbent's in the lead right now, but battling for second is, that could even change. It's only a few hundred votes difference between Greg Caput and the number 2 spot held by Jimmy Dutra. And about 250 votes behind is Felipe Hernandez. I think Jimmy Dutra came out on Facebook today saying, we did it. I think, pretty much claiming victory, but I think it's still too close to call.
Claiming victory meaning that he's going to do the runoff in November.
Yeah,
so it would be between Jimmy Dutra and Greg Caput as a runoff in November if it
doesn't change. Yeah. Although it is true, the election results have been updated several times since election night, and the ranking has held constant. There hasn't been any flip flopping.
Right. That typically is surprisingly in all my years of going over the elections here for the paper, and I'm usually the guy that writes the little info boxes and puts the numbers in. At least that was the case back in the day. I was always surprised at the fact that even early on you could kind of tell who was going to win, even if it's 5% of the votes are counted, because it typically, more often than not, held true to whatever that early count was, and that always kind of surprised me. And I still see that up on CNN for the presidential elections, and yeah, we're going to say that Donald Trump is the winner with 1% of the vote counted. How can you do that? But it holds. It's kind of, I'm sure they've got algorithms and stuff.
Yeah, there's statisticians who can look at the major national races. But yeah, we don't have that luxury here.
No, we just, get the votes counted and get it reported out as quick as possible, which does take a while. I think people are kind of surprised that it does take this long, as they, in today's day and age, we're used to having all of our information instant. And this isn't an instant thing. This is one of those things you want to get right. You want to take your time and get it right, but still be, as quick as humanly possible. Cause you gotta know these things. And so we're still trying. We can't get everything out on election night. So was that a challenge? No, to you as the person who's assigning all the stories, and how you assigned the reporters? Was that a challenge knowing that you weren't actually going to get results in? So your headlines the next day weren't necessarily going to be so and so wins this this race. Right.
Yeah, we had to hedge. Hedge our headlines saying like so and so holds the lead. I didn't feel we were we couldn't claim that one side had won or not yet. I didn't feel like we could really call any of the races on election night.
And that's just for print. Was you or Don Fukui? I wasn't working at night, so I don't know. Somebody was staying up pretty late and updating stories, as late, much past the print deadline.
Yes. Well, the key, I think, for this election night was talking to Gail Pellerin, the Santa Cruz County clerk, to figure out what their schedule was for releasing the data. Unlike in years past, there were only a handful of data dumps that night. So the first came at 8:30 and then 10:30 and then 1:30. So Don updated. He I guess he usually stays up late anyway, so he said he could do it. So he updated all the online versions of our stories, so they were current. For that 2 in the morning. Yeah.
Yeah. People, I mean, they might maybe not 2 in the morning, but people would be up late on election night if they really wanted to know the results of a race. So I suppose that was pretty good. Anything that you took away from this that you're going to go, you know what, come November, I'm going to do that a little bit better?
I think I want to meet as a staff and figure out, do this sort of postmortem, I guess, and figure out what we did well, what we could improve on. Definitely, I would like to get our Scribble Live on our website.
That was an issue.
Working well. That was really frustrating. On election day, we couldn't get our Twitter feeds and up running on the homepage.
Right. Scribble Live is something that we use to basically automatically pull in some tweets, usually from our own reporters or people that use a certain hashtag. It'll just pull those things in so that you could kind of see the conversation going via Twitter. And we've used that for fires and, other election nights and, big stories that are, you want a lot of interaction. But I don't know what happened because we've done it before a million times. So for some reason this time, the hashtag search for Twitter, it just didn't work. It would pull in for a second and then everything would disappear. And yeah, it was really frustrating.
Yeah. So, I mean, there were some hiccups on election day, but I would like to plan out. I think more planning needs to be done on how we can cover, how the reporting team can cover the election more comprehensively in the weeks leading up to the race. In the past, we've done candidate profiles, of each and every candidate, but looking at November's ballot, that's just way too many. Well, no one's, we haven't seen who's going to be running yet, but just looking at the number of races, it seems a little bit overwhelming. So figuring out, exactly what's the best way, what's the most equitable way to cover the races leading up to election day, and then on election night. I thought we actually did a pretty good job on election night. We had 2 main stories. One written by Jess York on the sort of on the blue wave, like looking at the numbers of registered voters and, seeing how many are Democrats, how many are Republicans versus independent. And then, talking to people at the polls about why they're voting. And then we also had a deeper look at the 4th District supervisor race, because that was far and above the hottest race. And then the next day, Wednesday for Thursday's paper was actually the busiest day. I didn't realize it's day 2. That's
it's actually
crazy.
Well, nowadays, because the information doesn't come in until so late, we're not going to get it in. That it's always been in the past anyway. Election night, once the polls close, 8:00, up until our deadline at the time was closer to 12:30. I think when I started. And we had our own press, so we could actually hold the press for a long time. And we might hold it for a half hour or something like that. But that was the busy time for us. And the next day really wasn't so much, because I think we had a lot of the results in back then. The data dumps happened earlier and more often. Mm-hmm. And they were more constant, whereas now it sounds like there's like 1 or 2 big dumps throughout the night, and then you're not getting the constant updates.
Yeah. So Thursday's paper was actually chock full of local news on local races. Each reporter wrote at least 2 stories on, looking at individual races and who's leading, talking to each of the candidates.
So you'll know that for next time, for November, that while election night is going to be pretty busy, the next day is what you're going to have to really make sure there's room in the paper for, and that your staff isn't too tired, because they're going to have a lot of work that day.
Right. Yeah.
So, that's good to know moving forward.
I think we've got a staff full of election junkies, though. I think everyone was pretty excited and, ready to putting the hours
That's
on
kind
Tuesday
of
and Wednesday.
It's kind of the MO of a newspaper person in general. I mean, most of them, maybe not features in sports, but if you're in the news department, typically an election night is like Super Bowl.
Yeah.
You know,
it's like game night. It's game so
on.
fun.
Let's go. Let's do this. You know, put your war paint on and you start going. It's, you know, it's always kind of been like that. Even the reporters who you didn't necessarily think would be really big or into the election. Like, you know, I just remember, you know, knowing even some of the interns who you think, oh, they're writing lighter stories or they're not so much into it. Something about election night. There's something in the air and they just get pumped. You're like, all right, let's do this. Let's do it. Let's do it. And, you know, and even me, I came from designing and, you know, graphic arts background and wasn't necessarily heavily into politics when I started here, which was, granted, I was 21 years old, but there is something about that night that just gets you pumped up. It's the adrenaline. It's everybody's rushing and running around. And
well, I think it's also part of it is it's the essential function of the newspaper. I mean, who else is doing what we're doing
to inform the electorate?
Right.
You know, so yeah, an informed electorate is makes for a better country.
Right.
You know, no fake news here, except when we mess up.
So tell me about I'm curious to hear about what it was like at the Sentinel in the 2000 election.
So the 2000 election was my first major election. I started here January of 99. So it was the first big, you know, presidential election and that I was a part of. And I had actually just moved from being the sports designer to a news designer. And I believe I did the front page that night. And it was, if you know, for all the young people out there or anyone who doesn't remember, 2000 was Bush Gore, and you know, the hanging chads, and you know, the Supreme Court getting involved. So election night then was not, it wasn't determined that night. Usually, the presidential election, you know who's going to win by the time you open the paper up the next day. I think our headline might have been "Too Close to Call."
Huh.
If I remember correctly, I did see another headline that I really wish was ours, and it was TBD, to be determined, with the two mugshots of the candidates, you know, kind of filling out the rest of the headline. I was like, oh, that is genius. That's one of those ones. I wish I had thought about that. But yeah, we were up late as we possibly could. We had, you know, local races as well that the local reporters were out at the viewing parties, you know, the candidate parties, and then coming back and writing, because back then you couldn't really write remotely. You had to get back in the office. So they all had to rush to get back to our downtown office and write up a story as quick as possible. I was busy tallying, you know, or just going online, or from the reporters, I think we got them faxed in, if I remember correctly back then. Yeah, they were just a constant stream of faxes that I had to go on to what we call info boxes, those little fact boxes that you see embedded in the story in print that say, you know, yes, 54%, no, you know, 46%. So I was constantly updating those and putting a little check mark if it was like a guaranteed winner. And, you know, so that was kind of my duty. And usually too, I would also, if it was for a national, a big event like a election, I would go through all the wire photos and lay them out on a table and kind of arrange them of like, you know, these are ones we might want to pick from, and these are A1 centerpiece suggestions. Mainly so we wouldn't duplicate photos inside, so the wire editor wouldn't come and like take a photo and be like, that's the one I wanted for A1, you know. So we kind of separated them out and on a big table, and would go through, and with other editors we'd pick, and we'd talk about a headline that would work best with that particular photo. I mean, it was really involved process back then, which was, I'm glad it was so involved, because I didn't know what I was doing. It was my first big election here. And then I believe we finally wrapped up, it was probably about 2 a.m, where we finally just had to be like, okay, we're not going to know who the president is. Little did we know back then, like that night, how drawn out it was going to be. Another month or so before we found out. But I believe we all went to a local establishment a local drinking establishment, even though it was after 2 a.m. So I won't mention, although I don't think it exists anymore. But anyway, we got to go in the back and just have some drinks to relax, because that is kind of the stereotype of the grizzled journalist, is you go into a smoky bar and you have drinks and you've got your whiskey or scotch or whatever. And that was kind of what it was. It was, you just sort of decompressed and talked about that night that just happened, and you kind of get it all out, and you joke and you laugh with all these other people who just went through the same adrenaline rush that you did, and then you go home and you do it the next day. You take a taxi home and do it the next day. But there was also this is another, this is kind of standard. If there's any other newspaper person listening to this podcast right now, you will all know what I'm about to say. But election night and pizza goes hand in hand. Like you cannot have an election night without pizza boxes everywhere, because that's just, you knew that was one of those nights like the company's going to spring for some pizza.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Like we're getting our cheese and pepperoni. For staying up late. Well, you didn't have time to go get dinner usually either. Yeah. So you had to, you had to eat somehow. And it was a nice little perk. We knew we were going to stay up late. We knew it was going to be a lot of work, a lot more work than a normal day. So, hey, you get pizza.
Yeah.
And a lot of, for us, it was usually Pizza My Heart. And as much as I love Pizza My Heart, when it can be a little oily when you're trying to type on a computer, so your fingers get all full of oil. But you learn to deal, and heaven forbid you have to use a fork or anything like that, because you never use a fork for pizza. That's not going to happen. So there were a lot of fun back then, and it's a lot of fun and a lot of work. But when you think of a busy newspaper night or a newsroom, election night, that's kind of what I think of. Those are some of the election night and any other big events are the ones that I typically think of first. I typically think of election night before any other major events, because usually those are bad news. Those, if an unknown event happens and it's a major event, it's typically bad. You don't really get good news, good breaking news. So that doesn't happen very often. But election night is a fun night where that it's not bad. It's the American process. It's a democratic process coming through, and it's kind of nice to be able to cover that and to think back on those nights. Some of my fondest nights here at the Sentinel. Mm-hmm. Oh, well, I hope you guys all learned a little bit about the election process from the newspaper's point of view. And I wish Kara all the luck in the world come November on maintaining the chaos, trying to contain the chaos, because it will be very, very chaotic. You might know a governor by then. I mean, big centerpiece. That'll be your new governor. Midterm elections. You'll know some stuff by then.
Yeah,
maybe.
That's true.
Maybe. We'll see. All right. Well, this has been the Reporter's Notebook. You can always join the conversation by calling and leaving a voicemail on our hotline. I'm going to call it that. 831-706-3205. You call and ask us a question, and we'll do our best to answer it and play it on the air even. You can also subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, I believe, coming up soon if it's not there already, and pretty much any place you get your podcasts. You can also email me directly at tsolis@santacruzsentinel.com. Thank you all for listening.